your father-in-law, a beloved brother and brother, a cherished uncle, a pillar of Montreal's Black community, and friend to so many. For Egbert, family and community were everything. Egbert had a big personality and an even bigger heart. As Elizabeth put it, to know him was to love him. Egbert Gay was born on October 31st, 1955, in Caribou, Grenada, to parents Mona Corion, also known as Landa Reese, and Albert Gay. As a young boy, Egbert immigrated to Trinidad and Tobago with his mother, settling in the picturesque town of Tunapuna. We heard that name earlier in the service. Egbert embraced the Twin Island country of TNT wholeheartedly. He became, as they say, Trini to the bone. He developed a passion for steel pan music. He joined the local band in his community, the Klondikes. He joined a national steel pan organization called Pan Trimbago and served at both regional and executive levels. Egbert had become a proud pan man who not only played the instrument, but actively promoted its cultural significance. The steel pan, now recognized as a staple of Trinidadian culture, wasn't always respected. The percussion sounds coming from metal waste, things like car parts, paint pots, dustbins, and oil drums. It took time to change perceptions. The late 1970s was pivotal, a time of transformation. And that's when Egbert co-founded a newsletter. It was called the Pan Yard Vibrations newsletter, and it put the pan on a pedestal. The steel pan was an instrument that emerged from the determination of the impoverished lower classes who would not let their customs be crushed despite their limited resources. This newsletter would lay the foundation for Egbert's future in journalism and advocacy. Egbert was always fighting for the little guy. In 1980, Egbert immigrated to Montreal to pursue his dream of a career in journalism. In 1989, he graduated from Concordia University with a BA in journalism and a minor in political science. All this while doing some casual construction work and raising his young son, who we've heard much about, Imar. The early 90s marked a turning point for Egbert. In 1992, he founded the Community Contact. In the following year, he married the person who had become the love of his life, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, soft-spoken and sweet, a calm and constant companion. Egbert had everything he needed, an unshakable trifecta: his son, his life partner, and his newspaper. Imar, the little boy, became Imar, the grown man that we see here today, a very grown man. And eventually began working for the paper, doing graphic design and layout, and helping with the distribution. Egbert and Imar were a formidable father-son duo. While managing the Community Contact and doing everything from writing and editing to delivering the paper, Egbert carved out a space for himself in radio broadcasting. It all started when he became a regular panelist on The Gang of Four with Tommy Schnurmacher on CJAD, bringing his bold and unapologetic views into the old studio on 4th Street. His unmistakable accent immediately stood out on the airwaves, and so did his political positions. He was considered the lone lefty on the panel. And there was lots of good-natured teasing about that. The battles between Tommy and Egbert were legendary. I'm sure many of you have heard them sparring over the years, tuning in from your cars, your homes, or your workplaces. Tommy and Egbert's heated arguments were part of the soundtrack of this city. But despite their very different points of view, Tommy and Egbert respected each other and developed an enduring friendship. Egbert also developed a loyal following of CJAD listeners. Even those who didn't agree with him loved listening to him. Egbert had that rare ability to draw everyone in. In 2007, the Community Contact was celebrating 15 years of telling the community stories. I was in my early 20s at the time, fresh out of university, and a freelancer at CFCF News, now CTV Montreal. I was taking any shifts that were available, and I was looking, though, for some stable, guaranteed work hours alongside the unpredictable television reporting shifts. And that's when Egbert hired me to work part-time, 2 days a week, as his editorial assistant. In November of that year, Egbert gave me a very special assignment. He wanted me to write about the paper's upcoming 15th anniversary celebration. I didn't have any personal memories of that first issue. It was June 1992, and after all, I was only 8 years old at the time. So, for research, I combed through that first issue, and I was transported back in time to when Egbert decided to put the first issue of the paper together on his living room table. Just 12 pages. No budget to print anything in color. That was out of the question. But what brought color to the paper were the stories themselves. There was a story about radio personality Leon the Caribbean Fox St. Martin, featured for his role in the community promoting Caribbean music and culture. There was a story about my aunt, Thelma Johnson, who'd opened one of the first black hair salons in Montreal. She was well into a third successful decade running Thelma's House of Beauty on Queen Mary Road. While leading the Caribbean Pioneer Women of Canada, a group she'd founded to unite women who'd come to this country under the West Indian domestic scheme. Although I didn't manage to spot her in this vast crowd, I believe Auntie Thelma is here today, and she'll be turning 95 next month. There was a story about Howard's stretch car and West Indian rhythms. The show he'd been bringing to the airwaves on CKUT 90.3 FM for a decade. There was a story about West Ken, a local Caribbean folk performing group that was planning a tour of the West Indies. And there was a story about Howard and Otis Grant, the young boxing brothers who were on the rise in their respective careers. These are the kinds of stories that form the bedrock of Community Contact, I wrote. Stories that would likely not have a chance in mainstream publications, but that matter greatly to members of Montreal's Black and Caribbean community. In total, I wrote about 600 words, and I submitted my own headline, "The Little Newspaper That Could." Egbert approved. Those days spent in the modest, cluttered office in NDG on Sherbrooke Street West were laid back, fun, and full of laughter. I would teasingly try to put on a Trini accent while calling out his name. Egbert! Egbert had a great sense of humor and was by far the most easygoing boss I've ever had. He, a proud Trini, tolerated me the proud daughter of Jamaicans, bringing in a reggae mix CD and playing it out loud in our working space. I have a very specific and vivid memory of the song Tek Him by 90s Jamaican dancehall artist Mad Cobra coming on. You guys know the song. I'll spare you, I won't start singing it now, although it's very tempting. The next thing I know, Egbert was on his feet, grinning from ear to ear and dancing in the middle of the workspace. I mean, it's the kind of thing that absolutely would not happen in any other newsroom. And I loved him for it. 2007 was special, but my start of the community contact actually started before that. It was in 2003, actually. That was the first time my byline was in the paper, February 27th, 2003. I brought the copy because I still have it. I kept it all these years. 20 years later, I still have that. So, I look back on what I wrote in 2003, and I cringe. I was an 18-year-old CJEP student writing in the University Contact, a pull-out section that existed at the time, and it was a space created specifically for students to showcase their writing. And my writing at the time was not very good. But it was a start. And that's what the community contact was for countless young Black journalists in Montreal. Motivated by Egbert's warm welcome, gregarious character, infectious energy, and constant encouragement, we practiced and developed our craft. He was a mentor like no other, dedicated to giving us opportunities. His door was always open when other doors weren't. I contributed to the paper on and off for 15 years, even while working full-time in television. My story, though, is just one of many. Egbert's impact and influence stretch far and wide. In the days after his death, social media was filled with stories from men and women expressing deep gratitude to Egbert for taking them under his wing. Andrew Mambo, a native Montrealer who now lives and works in New York City, is one of those people. He wrote a touching tribute that concluded with this. Before the call to community contact and talking to Egbert, I had reached out to many newspapers and even a few radio stations, but no one was willing to give me an opportunity. It's not easy for anyone to find their path as a journalist, but for journalists of color, it can be especially tough. And I found that often the only people who see something in us are the people who look like us. And Egbert was the first person to see something in me. And I want to thank Andrew, who couldn't be here today, for joining the service online and allowing me to share his words with you, and Elizabeth Emar, who sends his love and wants me to give you a big hug, which I will do after. I honestly don't know how Egbert found the time to be there for all of us. On Monday, June 5th, delivering the news of Egbert's death in our newscast was surreal. My first editor, a caring, kind, and funny person who was genuinely proud of other people's achievements and made the paper a platform to highlight their positive contributions to the community. This giant of a man The man who seemed to be at every single community event with his trusty camera in hand was suddenly gone. But on June 5th, and in the days that followed, as I watched other television reports and listened to radio tributes, I noticed something that left me in awe. Several of the journalists who were covering the story for major media outlets were Black. There was Sean Henry, host of Daybreak, CBC Montreal's weekday morning radio show. There was Anthony Nerestan, also a journalist at CBC. There was Phil Carpenter, a photojournalist at Global News. And in his report, Phil interviewed retired Global News anchor Alicia Bryan-Baines. And when I was asked, as a CTV news anchor, to share my memories of Egbert on CJAD 800's Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall, it was technical producer Brian Kalasar who helped make it possible. I realized that since I first started writing for Egbert 20 years ago, the city's media landscape has truly changed. There is much more space for us, a new generation of journalists. People like Julian McKenzie and Camila Hinkson. Just two examples of young community contact writers who've gone on to pursue their passions and build successful careers in mainstream media outlets. All those years ago when he started his own newspaper in 1992, amplifying our community's voices long before others caught on, Egbert was leading the way. 3 days after Egbert's death, there was new life. Imar became a father. A son was born. His name is Malachi Egbert Corian Mitchell, and he came into the world on Wednesday, June 7th at 3:53 p.m. June 8th. Thank you for that correction. You'd be a good producer. You're fact-checking me. Thank you, D. Jamila. Yeah, like I said, boss, it's a tough assignment. Egbert's loved ones are experiencing immense joy in the midst of profound grief. It is heartbreaking that Egbert never got to meet his grandson in the way that we would want. But we know that watching little Malachi grow will help us remember Egbert's legacy. Egbert loved to garden with Elizabeth. He spent his last day gardening with her. I can't help but think of the symbolism. Until the very end, Egbert was planting. The seeds that Egbert planted throughout his life. The seeds of selflessness, love, kindness, and generosity. Those seeds will continue to blossom and grow. Family, friends, the community contact team, CJAD colleagues, community members, people who knew Egbert personally, and those who only knew him from afar as a media personality. He touched all of our lives. As we all mourn Egbert's passing, I would like to share these words from the great Maya Angelou. A great soul serves everyone all the time. A great soul never dies. It brings us together again and again. So thank you, Egbert, boss, for being a great soul. Thank you for serving everyone all the time. Thank you for never dying, but living on in us. Thank you for bringing us together again and again.
Okay. I was going to tell you to stand up, but standing ovation. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think you want to stretch your wings a little bit? Because we have a word from the preacher to come. So those who are standing already, sorry, I can't tell you to sit. But just stretch out a little bit and air yourself out. Okay, you may be seated when you are ready.
Yes, Maria.
Well, next we're going to have a musical. We would normally say a meditation, and then Pastor Horace Thompson